different speakers, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to really welcome you here today on behalf of Refugees International, RC, and ASRA. We are here today to discuss a very critical issue which has been not more relevant than ever before, the issue of inclusive refugee policies and the impact of misinformation. With the number of displaced people, with the number of displaced people really hitting high records in history, now we have over 120 million displaced individuals, and with the rise of anti-refugees and anti-migrants rhetoric, which we have been seeing all over the world, and we have seen all over what's happened in Europe recently, in UK. So this issue becoming more relevant than ever. And the data also is showing us that refugees sometimes, or most of the time, stay in their host countries or communities for over 20 years. And we have also seen that the humanitarian aid or the humanitarian funding have been decreasing. All of that made us think, what is the future of this, right? How can we combat the misinformation, and how can we make sure that we have a longer-term strategies? Yes, humanitarian aid is important and is crucial, but it's not enough. At this moment, we have to start thinking about longer-term strategies that would allow refugees to really integrate within the host community, with the main factor of creating a win-win situation for both the host community and the refugees themselves. So today's conversation will be shedding light on how the impact of the positive or the inclusive policies and the impact of misinformation. Without further ado, I would love to introduce Mohammed Naeem, my colleague Mohammed Naeem, who is the chair of the United States Refugee Advisory Board, who will deliver also his remarks. Thank you very much.
All right. I do not do well with holding the mic and looking at our remarks. I'll try to do my very best. First of all, it's Thursday of UNGA week. Wow. Let's take a deep sigh of just like a breath together. I know you're tired. I know there's been a lot going on, but I just want to share our deepest gratitude for joining us. It means just an extraordinary. It means quite a lot to us. So let me just begin with some notes of gratitude. First of all, thank you first and foremost to OSF for hosting us tonight. Special thanks, very special thanks to Shiloh George of OSF, who has been so gracious and patient with our team over the last month. For those of you who have hosted an event, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you to our generous sponsors, Robert Bosch Stiftung. I hope I really did justice to that. The IKEA Foundation, and of course the Hilton Foundation. Your financial and in-kind support for tonight, but really not just for tonight, for really the organizations that are on this panel today or on the stage, has helped champion the inclusion of refugees across global stages. And that has led to some fundamental and some material changes across the humanitarian system. And of course, thank you to our esteemed speakers tonight, who combined have accolades that are just off the charts, and whose decades of wisdom we will benefit from greatly tonight and for the many days ahead. So tonight's theme is about inclusion and exclusion of forcibly displaced people, and it is one that is marred often in quite a bit of misinformation. This yields misperceptions about our communities, but it actually also regrettably causes nation states to develop and to operationalize exclusionary policies. This continuum does undermine the values and the principles of the system that we hold so dear. You see, as we see it, as conveners, this is also detached from the aspirations, as you know, of forcibly displaced people, their deep commitment to their own upward mobility, their service to society and civic responsibility. And if these misperceptions are not challenged with truth, with narratives, and with policies, then we as builders of nations and of the international system will come short of the visions that we hold so dear, to provide permanent and inclusive protections to those who need them most. As conveners of tonight's dialogue, we recognize the layered nuance of the overall theme and its complex manifestations across our work. So see tonight's panel as just a beginning touch point and a launch pad for the work that we can do together as advocates, as partners, and certainly as institutions. Just some agenda setting for this evening. We'll first We will have a first intervention by Raed Al-Salah, head of the White Helmets, followed by a panel discussion moderated by my esteemed colleague Raz Gardi, featuring Nobel Peace Prize winner Tawakkol Karman. Thank you, Tawakkol, for joining us. The Canadian Ambassador to the United Nations, His Excellency Bob Ray, as well as Deputy High Commissioner for UNHCR, Kelly Clemens. Thank you so much for joining us. And then, of course, after the panel, we will have the honor of hearing remarks from our United States Assistant Secretary of State for PRF, Julieta Valles-Noyes. Thank you. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Raed Al-Salah, is the head of the Syrian Civil Defense, also known as the White Helmets. As many of you know, the Syrian Civil Defense is a volunteer organization created in 2013 and made of former bakers, teachers, electricians, and just ordinary Syrians who are fighting for freedom in their country. There are over 2,700,000 rescue workers who make up the White Helmets and who have also saved over 62,000 lives. And just a bit of a personal note on this, I was in college when the White Helmets were founded, and I remember watching the videos of these brave souls going into war zones, and it had touched me just an extraordinary amount. So the fact that 10 years later I have just the privilege and the honor, because I'm getting chills to invite someone who had founded this organization is just a real privilege and a real honor. So with that, please join me in welcoming Raed Al-Salah to the podium.
مساء الخير جميعا. I'm so sorry I will speak Arabic. My colleagues Farouk شكرا جزيلا أول شيء لحضوركم وشكرا لهاي الدعوة للحديث عن اللاجئين لأنه أكيد هاي من أهم الأمور اللي عم تواجه السوريين بشكل خاص والعالم بشكل عام.
Thank you very much for inviting us and for your attendance here to tackle this topic, which is very important and affect all our community.
يعني طبعا هو عرفني انه عرف عني انه انا رائد صالح مدير وايت هيلمز، بس ما انه انا لاجئ من 14 سنه. من اول اللاجئين بسوريا نزحت ب 11/6/2011 وعشت في مخيم لمده 6 سنوات وانا عم بشتغل بالوايت هيلمز.
I was introduced as Raed Saleh, head of the White Helmets, but that did not mention that I myself is a refugee for 14 years. I was displaced in 2011 and lived in a camp for 6 years at the border.
لكن بجوز انا كنت محظوظ اكثر من كثير لاجئين سوريين انه قدروا يوصلوا لعلاقات على مستوى العالم ويقدروا يحكوا ويوصلوا وجعهم ورسالتهم ويقدروا يحموا عائلتهم حتى.
Probably I was luckier than many other refugees who did not have the access and the connections to be able to tell their stories and rebuild their life and lives of others.
لكن في ملايين سوريين ما قدروا يحموا عائلاتهم لهنا.
Millions of Syrians are still under threat and they couldn't protect their families.
كنت محضر كلمة أحكيها عن موضوع اللاجئين في دول الجوار، ولكن التطورات الأخيرة اللي صارت بلبنان خلتني غير عن شو بدي أحكي.
I had prepared short notes to share with you about the situation of the refugees, but the recent developments in Lebanon forced me to change a bit and tell about what's happening now.
اللاجئين السوريين بلبنان هن حالة استثنائية اليوم بالعالم.
The Syrian refugees in Lebanon represent a unique, exceptional model.
هن تهجروا أكثر من مرة.
They were displaced several times.
ما عندهم بلد يرجعوا له.
And they have no safe home to return.
لأنه هن عم ينزحوا من مناطق بلبنان ما فينا يرجعوا على بلاد القصير والزبداني ومضايا لأنه حزب الله محتل هاي المناطق.
Currently, they are being displaced inside Lebanon from an area to another, and they cannot return to their hometowns in Syria because they are occupied by Hezbollah.
وما قادرين يلتقوا خدمات بالمستشفيات أو يروحوا على المدارس لحتى يلجأوا لها.
And currently, they are blocked from accessing services at hospitals in Lebanon.
إذا راحوا على سوريا راح ينقتلوا، وإذا ضلوا بلبنان راح ينقتلوا.
If they try to return back to Syria, they will be killed. And if they stay in Lebanon, they die slowly.
لازم نرفع الصوت من شانهم لأنه ما سمعنا حدا عنهم.
We need to raise our voices for them because nobody is talking about it.
ولكن إذا بنرجع للنقطة الأساسية، اليوم عدد اللاجئين بالعالم تجاوز 100 مليون. ليش إحنا لازم نضل نحكي عن اللاجئين وحقوق اللاجئين؟ إحنا بالأصل لازم نرفع صوتنا لحتى ما يكون في لاجئين أصلا بالعالم، ولازم كل حدا يعيش في بيته وما يترك بيته، ما يضطر يتركه.
As we speak, there are maybe more than 100 million refugees around the world. Why we keep talking about the refugees crisis and how we can end this crisis and see a future where there are no refugees.
الوضع السياسي بالشرق الأوسط هو اللي أجج كل هاي أزمات اللاجئين، لأنه ما في أي أفق سياسي لأي شعب موجود بالشرق الأوسط.
The political situation in the Middle East is a reason for the flow of refugees in our region because there is no hope for communities there, no hope for people to live in peace.
عدم وجود حل سياسي بفلسطين ودانا ل7 أكتوبر، ودانا للاجئين جدد بغزة. عدم وجود الحل السياسي بالسودان عم يخلينا نشوف لاجئين بمصر. عدم وجود الحل السياسي باليمن عم يخلينا نشوف لاجئين. ونفس الموضوع بسوريا والعراق وكل مكان اليوم من الشرق الأوسط.
The absence of a credible political process in Palestine led to the explosion we saw on October 7th, and the absence of such a political process on Syria, in Sudan, everywhere, leads to explosions everywhere.
كلمة أخيرة راح أقولها واللي هي فعليا كل الأزمات الإنسانية اللي دائما بتتكلم الأمم المتحدة والمجتمع الدولي لحل هاي الأزمات هي نتائج مشاكل سياسية عم تعاني منها شعوب المنطقة من 70 سنة. ما هي مشاكل حالية عم نعاني منها هلا.
My last word is a reminder to everyone that all these humanitarian crises we see and the flow of refugees are symptoms and results of political crisis which the international community ignored.
قبل 9 سنين بمؤتمر المانحين قلت إذا بتقدروا تجمعوا كل أموال العالم ما راح توقفوا تفجير عائلة وحدة. وهلا بقول نفس الموضوع، إذا شد ما جمعنا تبرعات ما فينا نوقف تهجير العائلات، لكن بالحلول السياسية وإيجاد آفاق لأهل المنطقة هذا ممكن يساعد إنه الناس ترجع على بيوتها.
I recall 9 years ago at the donors conference in Brussels, I told the donors that no matter how much money you raise, you will not be able to prevent the displacement of one family. And I repeat my call again now. It's not about money. We need to address the root cause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ryan. This is a really very important, also a crucial point when I think also a lot of times we start talking about refugees as if it is the cause or it is the problem without really digging deeper into the root causes of what is causing the refugees to flee in the first place and try to work on solutions for the actual problems, not the refugee themselves as the problem. For now, I would like to open the space for our panelist and moderator. We have our moderator, Rez Gardi, who is the co-managing director for our seat, which is Refugee Seeking Equal Access at the Table. I would love to welcome Rez here, and she will introduce her panelists. Thank you very much.
Don't read the whole thing.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here moderating this critical discussion. As we gather here tonight, we're surrounded by leaders and advocates who are united by a shared commitment to reframe the narrative around refugees. This panel, Shaping Our Futures, Facts or Myths, Countering Misinformation and Shaping Refugees' Futures Through Inclusion, will dive deep into a vital issue: how misinformation and disinformation not only distort public perception, but also actively fuel exclusionary and harmful policies towards refugees that put millions of lives in jeopardy. But it doesn't stop there. These harmful narratives also sow division within our own communities, pitting groups against each other, fostering fear and distrust, and undermining the social cohesion that inclusive societies are built upon. Too often, refugees are depicted as a risk to be managed, rather than the people who are at risk themselves, vulnerable to persecution and in desperate need of protection. But tonight, we're here to flip that script. Through this conversation, we aim to highlight the truth, that refugees bring immense value to communities, and that inclusive policies are not only compassionate, but also economically and socially beneficial to all of our societies. I'm privileged to be joined by three exceptional voices who each, in their own right, contributed to shaping policies that foster inclusion and have countered harmful narratives about refugees around the world. Together, through this conversation, we will discuss the harmful effects of disinformation and false narratives and what we must do to ensure that the future of refugees is shaped by facts, not fear, and also the powerful role that inclusive policies can play in building stronger, more resilient communities. These panelists really need no introduction. I'm sure we know them all, but I will introduce them anyway. It's my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Bob Rae, Canada's Ambassador and Permanent Representative to the United Nations. Ambassador Rae has been in this role since 2020 and currently serves as the President of the UN Economic and Social Council for 2024 to 2025, and he's the second Canadian to assume this role. A seasoned statesman, he has previously served as Premier of Ontario and interim leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, with a distinguished career in both federal and provincial parliaments. It's also my great honor to introduce Kelly Clements, the United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees. With over 30 years of experience addressing the refugee and displacement issues, Kelly has held numerous roles, including Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the U.S. Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, and Acting Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, Lebanon, amongst many other roles. And lastly, but certainly not least, I'm incredibly excited to introduce Tawakkol Karman, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and an unwavering advocate for freedom of expression and women's rights. Tawakkol, a Yemeni journalist, was the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize from the Arab world. She was recognized for her non-violent struggle for democracy and women's safety. Her courageous leadership during Yemen's Arab Spring and her dedication to reconciling social and religious divisions continue to inspire millions around the world today. Please join me in giving our distinguished panelists a warm welcome to the stage.
It's a pleasure. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Hello. All right, we've got an incredible lineup of speakers, as you can see, so I want to get right into the conversation. We're talking about some very vital issues and some conversations that I think, I want to get right into it because of the depth of knowledge you all bring to these conversations through your work and your experience. So I've got a question for each of you to begin with. Misinformation often leads to fear-driven policies. How do you each think that governments and international bodies collaborate more on effectively countering false narratives and to promote evidence-based policymaking that can focus instead on the positive contributions of refugees? So just to set the scene. 3 minutes, and I'll start with you, Kelly.
3 minutes, and I can turn it on first. Good evening, everybody. I am really delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to be with this wonderful panel. And as we heard from Mohammed earlier, this is at the very end of a long week, but we're saving the best for last.
We are.
So thank you, and you can feel the enthusiasm with the speakers and those that have come before. This is a very serious topic, and it's a topic that we've been talking about actually throughout this week. because this is a week not just where, you know, the big players are over in the UN talking about what their governments are doing to try to bring peace, security, development, and other things to their people and to the global order, but we're also talking about ways that we as an international community need to come together to solve big problems. And when it comes, Rez, to misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, you said it, Tori said it at the very beginning, this is insidious, and it is a way to sow division, and it is a way to make sure that communities disintegrate as opposed to come together. And so for UNHCR, we've taken it quite seriously. We have also been privileged to have some support from government counterparts, and in particular, the European Union is helping to support 8 pilots in terms of trying to see what we might be able to do very practically in country and operational context. So for example, one of those contexts that we're looking at now is the Rohingya situation, and in the broader Asia community of countries in terms of how do we have the kind of practical tools to combat it, using technology, using, for example, AI, using algorithms, using also what our operational partners are seeing on the ground, and in particular, what refugees are experiencing themselves. And I say that last, but I probably should have said it first. Because we did a global survey last year where when you ask humanitarian workers how prevalent they think that hate speech or misinformation is, we get about 67% have said that there is a problem, and that's a big percentage. If you talk to refugees, it's 85%. So that is where we need to start this conversation, and we think we have a couple of tools that we're looking at. One, we have developed some global best practices principles in terms of information integrity. And second, we're working with refugees, actually driving the composition of a toolbox for humanitarians on how to counter hate speech and misinformation. So these are small steps, but it's promising.
And next, I'd like to go to you, Ambassador, to give a perspective on what governments in particular can do.
I just want to agree with what Kelly said for starters, and just to say what a pleasure it is to be here tonight. And I think the first thing we have to do is really try to normalize a conversation about immigration and migration and forcible displacement and refugees. It is a huge issue in the world. It has been in past periods of time. It's not unique to this period, but it certainly is true of the time that we're in right now. And I do think the comment was made earlier about the importance of really integrating the conversation about what we need to do to prevent displacement and to prevent people feeling that they must move. Let's be clear, moving is something that people do a lot. And that the notion that somehow everybody should just stay wherever they are, and that's where they should be forever, is not an ideal world either. Movement can also mean opportunity for people. We need to understand all those elements in it. But I think we really have to take the misinformation, the fear, and yes, the hate. And the trouble with the world we're in right now is that hate is not new, but hate gets multiplied in a way that we've never ever seen before in human history. We've never seen the speed with which, and the platforms that we provide to people who are purveyors of hate. Some of them even own large companies that are in the information business. And so we need to understand that, and we need to fight it. And we need to have the courage to identify it, and we have to really embrace this notion that it is our responsibility as public servants to share information and to share facts and to share the truth. The truth, the simplest truth about people who are forcibly displaced is that there is hardly any circumstance where they are a net burden on any society that takes them in, as long as that society allows them to work and allows them to earn a living and allows them to do what everybody wants to do, which is to contribute. Refugees come from all walks of life. They come from all aspects of life. and nobody wants to be in a situation of dependence their whole life. But we've created a situation where the solution that's now in people's minds is to literally put people in a large camp and pay them the very least we can possibly provide them, with the least amount of food, the least amount of services, and then be surprised when that model collapses and falls apart. So we need to create a new model, and we also need to embrace the fight. There is a fight going on, and if we don't engage it, then we will lose it. And right now we're losing it in some countries, in many parts of the world, because people are afraid to engage it. And so I'm proud of my government, which has said, no, we are going to take it on, and we are going to deal with it in a very forward-looking way. Which isn't to say that our government, unlike any other government, is different. It's not any different. But I do think there's a growing awareness that this is something we have to deal with and turn the negative narrative about what this is all about, what's happening in the world, to a much more regular narrative about how we can make it better and the kinds of policies that we can introduce that will actually make a difference. And perhaps we'll have time to talk about that, because I see that our time is up. So the red light has gone on.
And, you know, we've heard from Ambassador Ray and Deputy High Commissioner about the ways international bodies such as UNHCR and governments can respond to these. And Tawakkol, as someone with forcibly displaced experience yourself, and as a journalist, what do you think that governments should be doing to counter these negative narratives?
First, even when we talk about misinformation, we have to say, we have to put a very big question. Where did this information or this information came from? There is a reality, there is a very big crisis that the world now is witnessing, which is the plea of this million people. Our colleague said that it's, you know, the last year, we talk about 100,000 refugees around the a million around the world. So from where did they come? From where? Those people, they didn't flee, they didn't become something from the zoo. Most of them flee from wars, from terrorism, from tyrannies, from poverty, and all these things is caused by the governments. It's caused by the governments. So most of them came by the tyrannies and from the absence of the international community, from the complicity of some of the international countries, and they didn't solve the problem from its root. So how can we help those refugees? What is the most important solution? The most important is that the government around the world, and especially the well-known democratic countries, they have to sit with the people, they have to stand with the will of people for freedom, for democracy, for rule of law. They should stop tyrannies from killing the people. Why Syrian people flee from Syria? They just raise the voice of freedom and justice. The same thing in my country, Yemen. In Libya, in Sudan, people are looking now in Africa. The legacy of the colonialism, and now the military coup, and now. So it's very important that the government around the world should wake up and should know their responsibility to protect those people in need. This is number one. Number two, it's very important that they have to know that, as Ambassador said, that they are not a burden. Refugees are not a burden. They are really contributors. They are really builder in the community. So most of the things that we say that with those politicians, campaigns or now even with the rise of the right wing, they use the immigrants and the refugees as a political tool to reach to the power. So it's very important that those politicians should say the truth. How those refugees really empower the countries. They have to say the truth. Unfortunately, we didn't have that, kind of truth. Last thing, I will give just one example now. How is the hate debate when he said that the refugees, they eat cats and dogs. What a hatred, that, speech that he breathed. And after that, we see a lot of caricatures, a lot of, campaigns portraying the refugees, that they are the eaters and the cats and the dogs of people. So we will continue this discussion, but the government has a very, very big responsibility, more than anyone else. More than anyone. First, they have to stop their unnecessary dictators and supporting women, supporting wars, and stealing the wealth of people. Then people become poor and look for another place to live in a dignity and prosperity.
Thank you, Tawakkul. And you've mentioned how these negative narratives can really spread quite quickly and lead to campaigns and people using those to, again, spread lies and disinformation, misinformation about refugees and the role of governments. So Ambassador Ray, I'd like to come back to you as Canada's representative to the UN, both of your diplomatic and political experience through these processes within the UN system and Canada's role. What do you believe the role of countries like Canada and other countries are in combating some of these anti-refugee policies and sentiments that we see that are driven by fear-mongering and political agendas? And what do you think would be at stake if we don't push back against these harmful narratives?
Well, let me start with the second part of your question. If we don't stand up to lies and hatred, they take over, they swamp, and they drive fear, and they drive an agenda that is increasingly racist, nativist, exclusionary, and oppressive. But as I said before, I think what we really need to do is not to describe everybody who's worried about migration or worried about insecurity or is afraid of their situation to instantly say, well, you're a racist and you're full of hate. No, that's not the answer. But the answer is to call out the worst examples of where there is something specifically hateful. And I have to be careful because I'm a diplomat. I'm still paid to do that. So these things, I love listening to you because you can say all these things and all you do is, yeah, go ahead. But the fact is that we often respond to the craziest tropes by laughing at them, which is okay, but it also doesn't take them sufficiently seriously. Because I always think about the classic examples of hatred, like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which people said it's so ridiculous to look at this kind of conspiracy theory that it just, who could possibly believe this? Well, the answer is millions and millions of people. And it is one of the most severe expressions of anti-Semitism that the world has ever seen, which is god awful. But that's why you do have to take it on. And the problem is that it's not just governments that have to take it on, because governments themselves are suspected by some people as not being reliable or having their own angle or simply trying to take or change the subject or something else. It has to be a way in which we all engage in really trying to explain to people why it is we're in the situation that we're in, why we see the movement of people the way we see them, and why attempting to exclude or block or limit or disempower people is actually exactly the wrong way to go. It doesn't work. It only creates more trouble. It creates greater difficulty, and it doesn't solve the underlying problem. So I think there's often a reluctance on the part of governments to talk about immigration and migration. You're told, don't raise that subject. You sort of say, remember when I was running for office, people would say, don't talk about this subject. I said, everybody's talking about it to me at the doorstep. So I think we better talk about it. And we better have a conversation and try and have serious conversations. It's difficult in public life today to have conversations. There is no such thing as dialogue. I give my point of view, you give your point of view, you're wrong, I'm right, end of conversation. That's not a dialogue. We need to talk. We need to have a really serious conversation about the world that we're in today, because it is a world in which, yes, there are many, many people who are moving, unprecedented numbers, and at the same time, we need to understand the economy needs migrants, the economy needs people, business needs people. We need movement, we need people looking for opportunity. All these things are part of the world that we're in. And so if we're not allowed to have this conversation, we say, oh, don't talk about that, it's too touchy, too difficult. We're never gonna get anywhere. We have to have the conversation. Governments have to be part of it, but we need leaders from all walks of life, from the business community, the sports community, from all walks of life, who are gonna be able to engage in the conversation. And I think that's part of what we're doing tonight. If I may say so, it's part of what Open Society's been doing for a very long time. Many other people have been trying to do it, but I think it's exceptionally important. Thanks very much.
Rez, can I just do a quick follow-up to the ambassador's comment, because I was gonna take a little pressure off of governments. But private sector,
Yeah.
because they have such influence, both in terms of the advocacy narrative, but also the technology to help us combat this on a very practical level. Some of you were involved in the Global Refugee Forum in December, and we had leadership from companies like Google and then Meta to try to look at this in a very serious way. I mean, I agree, dialogue is absolutely fundamentally important, but we also have to combat this also using technology as well. And so this became quite a large multi-stakeholder effort. And I hope that those of you in the room that weren't involved in that and are inspired by this conversation to get engaged, to join us, because I think there's a very important effort that needs to continue.
I want to add something here that, yes, big tech, especially the big tech companies, has a very big responsibilities in controlling this narrative and also to fix its also algorithm. I am member of the oversight board of Meta, of Facebook and Instagram, and we are working a lot to hold Meta accountable in this regard, and we are in a daily work with them on this, in this regard. But I want to, yes, the also private sector, also NGOs has to play a very good, very strong work on helping, immigrants and refugees and to fix, this narrative. And again, it's very important to focus how this refugees, how those people is really helping the countries, helping, the countries that, host them, but also those countries has really to deal with them in a very good way. Not to isolate them or to not give them, rights. While even with that, those people really do a great, improvement in their countries. But what I want to mention, and I know that the time is, up for all of us, that it's a very big mistake when governments think that now those refugees are a burden. And I want to say this point because now there is some governments, they are pushing their refugees to return to their countries. And they, for example, Syria, under the rule of Bashar al-Assad. And now there is a law, for example, in Netherlands, for example, they said Syria or Yemen is now the state, my country is, 1 week ago there was a very big, huge, demonstration in Netherlands calling for stopping this kind of amendment in the laws that said Yemen is a safe country and that Yemeni return back to Yemen. We don't want them to be a refugee anymore. And the same thing now. Now there is a very big debate between those governments that boycott the relationship with Bashar al-Assad, and now they want to make another, new relationship with Bashar al-Assad because of the refugees. Because of the refugees, they want just, they want to return those refugees to Syria, and they will, shake hands with Bashar al-Assad. Again, this is a very big mistake. Those dictators who are the one who destroyed the peace global, and from the day one when we didn't deal with them in a very serious way, they forced those people to flee from their countries, and they also threaten your internal, national security. And this is a very big debate that why this racism and hatred came here in the US, for example, or in Western countries. Why? Why this hatred? Because one of the things is the plea of these millions people, and they said the people they said all this, and there is no real solution. So we need a real solution from governments, from US government to stop this kind of war. Now what happened in Palestine, the genocide that's happening in Palestine, and there is no real act to stop this genocide. And now in Lebanon, and then they scream, oh, we don't want refugees. We don't want, what is, so you have to stop the problem. Occupation should be stopped now. The dictatorship should stop now. If you want, we need to stop this thing. Otherwise, the hatred will increase, the racism will increase. You will see a lot of people more dangerous than Trump will be in the power. So it's very important, for us, for all of us. And I'm focusing on the role of the government because they are the one who caused all this. NGOs that are doing a lot of work in this regard, but we need a real international decision to stop this, this catastrophe.
Thank you all for your perspectives, and you've all pointed to different roles that governments, UN actors can play, and you've noted the role that different civil society can play jointly to address root causes, misinformation, the xenophobia and hate that can come, and also on the other side, the importance of inclusive policies that lead to more social cohesion, more vibrant societies, economically, socially. And so I just want to end with just one final question. We have a lot of refugee leaders who've come all the way to New York because they want to contribute to the solutions, because they have been working actively at the grassroots levels with their communities, leading refugee-led organizations, and working alongside their governments and other civil society actors. And here you've pointed to the collaborative efforts that led to the Global Refugee Forum, where many refugee-led organizations and leaders were involved. However, the space in New York is a little more challenging, and there are possibly less spaces for refugees to be involved in the processes. So just 1 minute from each, just to final question around what systematic changes within international institutions are needed to ensure that the voices of refugees are included in shaping policies that impact their futures. And I want you really to focus on the changes to the system to allow refugee voices to be embedded within these institutions so that they have a say in the policies that impact them. So 1 minute each, please.
There is huge resistance in the UN system because there's a lot of countries that say the UN is the United Nations. Nation states are it. We don't want civil society, we don't want other groups, we just want nation states to be involved. I think that's wrong. I don't think that's what the charter intended. I don't think we would have had a charter without the broad support of civil society in 1945. I think we need it now. I've been very proud to have been able to write a report on the Rohingya situation and on refugee policy more broadly in Canada before I came here to New York, where I said we've got to make sure that refugee-led organizations are part of how we do things, and that we recognize that refugees have agency. They are people who have views and who are, I remember when I first walked into the refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, I turned to the person who was guiding me at the beginning, and I said, how does this place work? He said, what are you talking about? I said, any place got 1 million people in it, there's politics here, there's groups here, I mean, it's there, you gotta feel it, it's tangible. He said, well, we have a leadership council, and we're putting on. I said, great, let me meet the leadership council. So you got to understand this dehumanization of refugees, this way of commodifying people so they aren't allowed to take responsibility and control of who they are, is profoundly anti-democratic. It's never going to work. The only way we work is if we have leaders of communities able to come forward, lead the way. And in Canada now we have a policy that says any discussion, any government delegation on refugee issues, we'll have refugees on the delegation. And I'm very proud we did that. Other countries have followed. We've been able to have a group of countries now that are doing this. And we are, I think, creating a different model for what the future should look like. Now, whether we can get deep buy-in for this model, I don't know, but there's actually some exciting things happening on the ground in a number of places where governments are recognizing that this is the way to go. This is how we're going to address this question. We need to move forward. And there are other voices too. But we need to fight those voices, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I took way over a minute.
It's very good to follow you on this point, because I couldn't agree more. But for those of you that are a bit disheartened by this week, it's not about this week. You know, it's really about what happens when you go back to those places where you're making a difference on the ground, or those organizations that you're leading in these contexts in which we're trying to make a difference, and it's looking at the change there from within. I have to say, last weekend, one of the highlights other than this event in the entire week was the action days for the Summit of the Future. The voices of those with lived experiences came out in almost every panel.
Exactly right.
And that was what was really important. It wasn't for those of us to talk about what we've seen in these operational contexts. It's to talk about, from those that are in those operational contexts, what's important, what needs to change. But there are some changes systemically, Wes, to get to your point, that we too, and Canada, the United States, others have led the way on meaningful engagement. You have the United States Refugee Advisory Board sponsoring this event. We have a global, and I was pleased to learn that we have one of the representatives in the room with us. We have a global advisory board for UNHCR that looks at guidance, that looks at policies. We are, in terms of it, we have to get to what's meaningful engagement. It's not how many people you have in a room that have lived experience, but what are they able to contribute to making changes, to making a difference, to designing programs differently, to making an impact. And we're serious about this with regard to the localization agenda in every form. Thanks.
Yeah, the voice of refugees, they call it for justice. They call it for accountability, and accountability and justice will really prevent, the continuance of this tragedy. And they want their voices to be real, represented in the United Nations, especially in the Security Council. Their voices to be heard without any kind of P5 vetoes on their demands. So one of the most important demands and from the voices of these refugees, 100 million around the world, is that we need a reform in the United Nations. Real reform in the Security Council. Because of that veto, the P5 rights of veto, they caused all this catastrophe. So this is the voice. It is not just, let's always talk about the root of problems. So we have to be united enough to stop this veto, because without this veto, Syrian people will not flee. Palestinian people will not have that catastrophe. Ukrainian people, people everywhere. So let's unite, and also let's put our fingers on the real problem. Thank you so much.
Ambassador Ray mentioned in the beginning that we need real dialogue, and I hope that this conversation has demonstrated what dialogue from government, multilateral institutions, refugee leaders, and civil society can look like, and we can have these debates and discuss these ideas for a better future for all of us. So please join me again in thanking our wonderful panelists for these.
Thank you.
And thank you all panelists for that. It is my great honor, if I can get back to this podium, my great honor to introduce our final intervention for the evening, Ambassador Julieta Valls-Noyes, the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. Ambassador Noyes has a distinguished career as a senior Foreign Service officer with past roles as U.S. Ambassador to Croatia and Deputy Assistant Secretary for European and Eurasian Affairs. and she has dedicated herself tirelessly to fostering international relations and managing humanitarian initiatives around the globe. Ambassador Noyes brings with her an impressive wealth of experience in diplomacy. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
So you're gonna have to forgive me, I'm a little bit like Muhammad, I like to talk with my hands, and speaking while holding a microphone, just bear with me. But, look, thank you so much, I think it's been a really interesting and a very engaging conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have this kind of dialogue. I will say, as Assistant Secretary of State for Populations, Refugees, and Migration, PRM for short, but also as the daughter of refugees myself, I want to start off by thanking you all, because there is a lot of support in this room. There's a lot of lived experience in this room, and it is the people in this room who are going to make a difference on the types of issues that we have been talking about tonight. Your work is really an essential part of promoting refugee leadership in resettlement policy, in national policy, in supporting the full integration of refugees into communities across the United States, around the world. And I'm really glad about some of the questions that we got, because I want to talk tonight about some of the policies that we are undertaking and some of the approaches that we are taking in the United States to get to these issues. Let me start off by saying and really emphasizing that the voices and the intellectual contributions of people with lived experience of forced displacement are absolutely essential in making our policies effective and in helping us to successfully integrate refugees into our communities, whether that's in the United States or in Colombia or in Lebanon or wherever it is. Those voices are absolutely critical. We have witnessed the impact of these voices in the at the community level and at the national level around the world, and certainly in the United States, we've seen how refugees are contributing to our economy, to our culture, to the vibrancy of the restaurant scene, to fashion, to music, to whatever aspect of life they touch, they contribute. And there is compelling evidence that refugee-inclusive policies benefit us all. A recent study by the U.S. Department, I changed hands so I can use the other hand, but a recent study by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services showed that between 2005 and 2019, refugees in the United States contributed $123.8 billion with a B, dollars more to the economy. They contributed more than what the government spent to support them. So we take very seriously this issue of refugee inclusion because it's good for us as well. And at the same time, we are also advocating with other countries to adopt inclusive policies that respect the dignity of the people who have experienced forced displacement, and to give them agency in their own lives. And those policies absolutely economically and socially benefit the communities and the countries where the refugees arrive. So I'd like to now highlight a few initiatives that we are undertaking that center refugee voices into our policies and programs and that promote refugee inclusion. And I was so grateful to get some ideas from the panel that preceded. Kelly, I want to talk to you about the AI piece some more, but there's more that we can do. But let me tell you about one initiative, and it's one that I'm proud to highlight, and that is the Equitable Resettlement Access Consortium, or ERAC as we call it. Since 2022, the consortium has increased access to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program for highly vulnerable refugees in need of resettlement by expanding the mechanisms that we can use for referral for resettlement. ERAC is specifically intended to help identify refugees who may not have access or who may be afraid to seek access or to approach UNHCR. This consortium also expands our resettlement partners to include refugee-led and community-led organizations on the ground. This consortium is a critical model for how global partnerships with both UNHCR and with refugee-led organizations For example, organizations that serve LGBTQI plus refugees or other refugee protection stakeholders can help expand equitable access to resettlement. Now, over the last several years, and I know many of you in this room are familiar with this effort, over the last several years, we have taken an all-out effort to rebuild our resettlement program in the United States, while also encouraging other countries to build out their resettlement programs. We see the number of forcibly displaced people around the world growing, and the number of people who need resettlement is growing, so we all have to do more. International cooperation, collaborative work within the United States, but with other resettlement partners, is helping to expand global capacity, but also helping to strengthen our shared infrastructure. And it's really a key priority in our diplomacy. This is something that we're very focused on in the United States, and it's something that we're working on very hard. Let's talk for a minute about the domestic side of resettlement. We are continuing to center refugee voices through our reception and placement program. For example, many of our national resettlement partners and resettlement agencies are led by or were founded by refugees, including, for example, the Ethiopian Community Development Council. We've worked to make our reception and placement program and our network of domestic resettlement agencies more accessible. Greater diversity makes for a stronger program. In our overseas engagement with host countries, we're also continuing to promote inclusive policies for refugees that open the door to other types of investments, including from the private sector and development actors. On Monday, Secretary Blinken hosted an event here at the General Assembly talking about how to modernize the humanitarian response to include a greater range of actors. Yes, humanitarians, but also development actors, the private sector, philanthropy, and refugee voices. So hi, Mohammed, it was nice to have your voice present at that panel. So it's a fundamental aspect of all of our initiatives. We continue to prioritize the leadership of refugees with lived experience and to promote refugee-led organizations' leadership in international forums. I have been honored to give refugee voice in all of our participation at the XCOM meetings, at the Global Refugee Forum, at various international consultations. We're also working very hard with the U.S. Refugee Advisory Board on a range of policies. So in the days and weeks ahead, we look forward to learning even more from refugee voices, from people who are working to expand the expertise and the influence of refugees and people with lived experience in setting our policies, whether it's resettlement or integration or international diplomacy. So thank you all so much for this opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do and for giving us an opportunity to reflect on what we need to do better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Juliet. You have really highlighted very important initiatives or policies, programs that have been taking place here in the United States, and usually countries such as, or governments such as the United States can set some standards for other countries sometimes to follow, which is great to see such things are happening here in the US. For now, we're gonna have just our closing remarks, and we'll deliver it at Mustafa Aliyu, who is the co-managing director for our seat. Please, Mustafa, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm a bit nervous to see actually amazing friends and people who've been wanted to work with for a long time, and also presence in the front. And I hope you have a couple minutes left in your heart and mind just to hear my closing remarks, and definitely will get you off the reception. I think what we've learned today, that the way we talk about refugees is not only wrong, but actually very divisive. Too often, the conversation is between the extremes, casting refugees either as a national security threat or as heroes overcoming the impossible odds. Both narratives oversimplify the issue and fail to provide the full picture. This polarized framing needs to stop and need to change. We must move beyond viewing refugees through a binary lens, of risk or savior. And instead, we should foster an inclusive, objective conversation. one that involves all stakeholders, and especially the refugees themselves. Yes, focusing on a humanitarian lens is important, but let's be honest. Lately, we've seen some displaced population are more deserving than the others. And if we are serious in making any progress, we need more pragmatic conversation. One that doesn't pick and choose whose humanity worth saving. The rise of anti-refugee sentiment globally proves that humanitarian narrative alone is no longer effective or enough. So the important questions are, how do we address displacement in ways that are sustainable, fair responses to the concerns of the host communities? And crucially, how do we include refugees and refugee-led organizations in those kind of conversations? Refugees are not passive recipients of aid. They are leaders and experts in shaping their own future. RC, the team I'm part of, has worked tirelessly over the last 3 years to shift this narrative by establishing refugee experts advisory bodies within government structures like the Austral, like the Canada, like the Australia, New Zealand, and most recently, we're super proud that actually Germany now just announced that their establishment of the advisory body. We want to ensure that refugees are directly involved in shaping the policies that affect their lives. Our newly established presence as an RC in New York, coupled with our ongoing work in Geneva, makes us proudly and sadly one of the few, if not the only, refugee-led organization with continuous access in both of these critical UN hubs. But this is one step. The real hope lies in transforming how we engage with refugees and bridge the toxic divide between politics and expertise refugees bring to the table. As today's panel highlighted, that misinformation, disinformation fuel exclusionary policies that dehumanize refugees and distort public perception. These false narratives lead to harmful policies that are driven by fear, not by fact. The cost of exclusion is clear. Countries that adopt these policies forego the social and economic contributions refugees bring. Detention, deportation, the hostile policies come at much higher price than inclusion ever will. Refugees are not burden, they are an investment in a shared future, but to realize these benefits, we must continue or counter misinformation and ground our policies with fact. And this is where all of you come in. So RC cannot do this one alone. We need your partnership to bring balance and factual conversation back into refugee discourse, whether through financial support, strategic advice, or even helping spreading the truth. We need your help. And thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you again, OSF, for hosting us and for all the supporters. And I just want to invite you for a reception outside. And let's continue the conversation. Thanks.
Nice to see you, Phil. Ready? Give me a quick chat, yeah. Try to figure out. We've got some issues at home we have to.
Kelly, can we take a